The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress is a four-engine heavy bomber developed in the 1930s for the United States Army Air Corps, USAAC. Competing against Douglas and Martin for a contract to build 200 bombers, Boeing's entry, prototype model 299X B-17, outperformed both competitors and exceeded Air Corps performance specifications. Although Boeing lost the contract to the Douglas B-18 Bolo due to the crashed prototype, the Air Corps ordered 13 more B-17s for further evaluation. Since its introduction in 1938, the B-17 Flying Fortress has evolved through numerous design advances, becoming the third most produced bomber of all time, behind the four-engine and multi-role consolidated B-24 Liberator, the twin-engine Junkers Ju-88. The B-17 prototype, with the factory designation Boeing Model 299, was designed by a team of engineers led by E. Gifford Emery and Edward Curtis Wells and built at Boeing's own expense. The Model 299's first flight was made on July 28, 1935, with Boeing's chief test pilot Leslie Tower as control. On August 20, 1935, the prototype flew from Seattle to Wright Field in 9 hours and 3 minutes at an average cruising speed of 252 miles per hour, 406 kilometers per hour, much faster than the competition. In the years following World War I, the United States was heavily influenced by the Italian air power theorist Giulio Douhet, who called for heavy investment in a force of bombers to fly on the front lines, destroy enemy infrastructure, and destroy their will to make war. In theory, in the words of British Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, the bomber will always succeed. The Americans believed the B-17, with its Norden bomb sight, could have been the bomber. They also believed they had a plane that could fight its way in and out of a target area, unaccompanied, and return home safely. The plane was a Boeing B-17, better known as the Flying Fortress. Originally, the Boeing B-17 bombers were intended from the start to engage strategic targets with precision daylight bombing, penetrating deep into enemy territory by flying above the effective range of anti-aircraft artillery. The turbo-supercharged radial engines will provide the necessary high-altitude performance, and the heavy defensive armament will provide protection against attacking fighters. Accuracy had to be achieved with the Norden bomb sight, developed and fielded in secret during the 1930s. The Norden consists of a gyroscopically stabilized telescopic sight coupled to an electromechanical computer through which the bomber enters input for altitude, atmospheric conditions, airspeed, ground speed, and drift. During the bombing, the sight was switched to the autopilot to guide the aircraft to the correct release point. In the hands of a skilled bomber, the Norden is an incredibly accurate sight. Although it was Japan that attacked America at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the official policy of the United States and its allies was to defeat Germany first. The problem was that there was no easy way to attack Germany, as a cross-channel invasion of Europe was years away. The British had carried out aerial bombardments, but the heavy losses forced them to switch to night bombardments, which greatly reduced their effectiveness. The first B-17 attack in Europe occurred on August 17, 1942, when 12 aircraft attacked a railroad base in Rouen, France. The number of American bombers continued to increase in Europe, and attacks and losses began to increase. While the U.S. 15th Air Force also had B-17s, the most famous group that flew them during the war was the UK-based U.S. 8th Air Force. The B-17s flown by the 8th saw some of the fiercest fighting of the war. Definitive version of the B-17 entered service in the summer of 1943. Armed with no less than 13.50 caliber machine guns, including 2 in a new chin turret for defense against direct hits. The B-17G is quite hairy with a machine gun. It was operated by a crew of 10, including pilot, copilot, navigator, radio man, bomber, and gunner. Aircraft service ceiling 25,000 to 35,000 feet, 7,500 to 10,500 meters, depending on the bomb payload. As the Americans flew further into Europe and Germany, the missions became more lethal. One of the worst days of the war for the B-17 and its crew was the second attack on German ball bearing production at Schweinfurt, Germany on October 14, 1943. Losses were so heavy in the mission that it became known as Black Thursday. The B-17, with all its armor and firepower, could not continue flying unaccompanied against swarms of German fighters and their advanced air defense systems. Clearly, something had to be done because the bombers couldn't get through. But help soon arrived as North American P-51 Mustangs began reaching the beleaguered 8th Air Force in numbers large enough to make a difference. The B-17s finally had fighter planes that could escort them in and out of Germany and began to overwhelm German defense and industry. With renewed focus and strength, the Allies finally achieved the air superiority needed over Normandy for the D-Day landings in June 1944. Sharing production with the Douglas, Lockheed, and Vega companies, Boeing oversaw the construction of some 12,730 Flying Fortresses, almost all of them committed to the high-altitude bombing of Europe. Although produced in smaller numbers than its counterpart the B-24 Liberator, the B-17, with its superior high-altitude performance and greater resistance to combat damage, is a mainstay of strategic bombing campaigns. By the end of the war, the B-17 was an obsolete aircraft that had been outpaced by another Boeing bomber, the B-29 Superfortress. The aircraft were withdrawn from frontline service and used as transport aircraft and even drones. While the US had fewer than 200 at the start of the war, more than 12,000 B-17s were produced by the end and served in every theater. Many B-17s survive today in museums, and there are a few that are still flying. For many, the B-17 was the iconic bomber of war, and the Flying Fortress remains a symbol of American strength.